Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to the shed. Hey, Marissa, Bowden, James, RL. Nice to have you guys back.
Welcome.
Hello, Jerry. How are you?
Hello, Siva. We're not together today, but I'm just trying to see all the faces because I've just got your wonderful screen on at the moment. I'm going to look at the gallery. I'd like to see you all. Hi,
Excellent.
everybody.
Well, this is a half an hour session. A few of you have been before, so welcome back. Or if it's the first one, it's an Ask Us Anything session. Now, we're going to go through concrete formwork today. But also an opportunity if you've got any questions, throw them at us, and also a few tips and tricks on how to use tools. But let us get started for the next half hour. So Formwork Finishes. But before we get to that, a little bit of current events, or perhaps not so current, was the Productivity Commission looked into and did a study on this housing affordability crisis. So I'll talk really briefly about that and try not to labour it because a lot of it is well publicised. You know, the government commitment: 1.2 million houses over the next 5 years, which is effectively 240,000 homes is the target. And we did in the last 12 months to June, we did 176. So it's about three quarters of what it should be. And I found this fascinating. And if you haven't had a look, just Google it. You can download that. It's worthwhile reading and keeping an eye on that. But a couple of things just to note from this. That purple line is a metric, GVA, which stands for gross value added per hour worked, right? Value added per hour worked. And that is essentially for the last 30 years, the other industries, the economy as a whole, has improved its productivity by about 49%. This
And that includes buildings, so it shows you how badly building's gone.
Yeah, and it includes building, which would have brought that average down. Now, the number of dwellings completed per hour worked by housing construction workers has declined, and I was actually shocked to see this, Jerry. Has declined by 53%. So 30 years ago, we were 53% more productive. And then this, if you use the GVA, the gross value added per hour work, that's that blue line. That's probably a more fairer line. So minus 12. So it's still going backwards. Still about a 60% gap between productivity of the construction industry and everyone else. Does that surprise you, Jerry?
It's disgusting. Look, it did surprise me. But there are so many things that this paper does not really address, and maybe that's one of the things we want to talk about. I also want to say to the audience, if you may want to say too, that we are planning that each of you will be getting some reward for your attendance.
Yes.
Including also we're going to be rewarding people who open our learning modules each week and some of the other things, because we think this is the quickest way to impact on productivity. Mental health, the report did not talk about the disgusting level of frustration and discontent and bullying and all the mental health issues that are scarring a lot of the larger sites now as workforces get bigger.
That's a really good point. The 4 points, I might just mute James. The 4 points, and again, complex slow approvals, right? Extensive development construction approvals. And the actual construction part is often just a small part of it. So there's some problems with our approvals process. Jerry, I know you've been talking about that for a long time. Interestingly, and we're seeing this too, is that innovation and spending across the construction sector is relatively low compared to other sectors, right? So there's generally a slow uptake in new tech in construction. The fact that you guys are here today, or if you're watching this recording, you would be the exception to that. But generally, as a construction industry, we're a little slow with innovation. I mean, there were some of the reasons for that is the culture, lack of direct benefits to firms, but also a chilling effect, which I thought was interesting, from frequent regulatory changes. So because things are changing all the time, the goalposts keep moving, it's hard to innovate when you're just trying to keep up.
Well, it's true, but I think this is the blame game. You know, you guys and girls may be reading my post, but I call them blah blahs. A lot of this stuff is being spun in the end. Instead of fix it, we should have kept up with the national productivity in other industries. It is easy, just simple things. I mean, the approval process could be automated, except when it's really takes skill. And if any of the designers out there, and also especially the construction building beautiful buildings and beautiful spaces is really important. So we don't want to compromise the beauty of our communities and precincts for speed. But I just reckon it could be done just so much faster. And the prefab side, we need to make sure that prefab is essentially covered like any other building, a simple regulation framework that covers both prefab and on-site work.
We'll get on to that. And the last point, and I've just got off the call with a education provider who wants to roll tools out to make it simpler to attract and retain their students. And it's
for them to enjoy their studies. Again, like I
studies.
did. I just love learning about building.
Yeah. So we've got an issue with that. So again, this is one of the things that we're seeking is tools to try to help, particularly this. We're passionate about education, and the fact that you guys are here is fantastic. So let's get into Formwork Finishes, Jerry. I know you're a risk man, right? You put risk first and foremost. So let's look at the risk around Formwork Finishes. The financial loss is very high.
So I wrote my notes here. I said concrete is unforgiving. Now I will be talking to you people. Now some of you will have more experience about face concrete than I have. I would argue that I've seen more concrete surfaces than nearly any human around. But to get there, takes skill, and I'm going to probably home in on the things that we don't know, and I'm also very open to anybody to come in with something and their own experience, as long as it relates to the principles of doing formwork correctly. And we are concentrating mainly on vertical formwork today, the non-standard formwork. I'll weave in a couple of best practice items about general finishes against a form board.
So financial loss very high. Mark, good comment on that houses are bigger, hence the comparison. And I think that's why the GVA metric was a bit kinder than the 53%. I think it was still minus 12%. Harm generally with getting formwork finishes wrong, relatively low harm,
Very low.
Yeah, very low. But the rectification, you made me use a different color on this one. Extremely hard to rectify if not picked up.
Extremely difficult because the concrete is so unforgiving, and we'll go into the granular issues on how to avoid making a mistake, especially with high value class 1 finishes.
The latency detection is fairly obvious. If it's not right, you can detect.
Well, that's mainly latent defect. Look, normally the item itself will be fine. It will not have the latent defects we're seeing with waterproofing and flashings and concealed products, but certainly concrete cover and those issues and concrete quality are quite important. I will touch on those.
Okay. Well, let's get into some key terms. So let's jump into tools. Where are we going, Jerry?
We're going to the Formwork Finishes under structure, concrete, concrete finishes, and we're going to the Formwork Finishes. So we've got an ometer here. This allows us all to see. Now, I'm going to fess up. Even though I have seen hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of concrete and concrete surfaces, I was unaware of this until I did a defect claim about 5 years ago. And we were looking at all the different classes, and I got into the specifics Australian standard to do with class of concrete. There are 5 different classes. Most of the concrete that you'll see day to day is 2 or 3, is class 2 or 3. And there are different levels of it. I'm going to be saying that, so the basic terms that I use are basically flatness, blowholes or compaction issues, face step, so the step or lip between the edge of form, especially in vertical formwork. I've got the term blowhole here.
Can you explain blowhole, please?
Blowholes will be air holes or lack of compaction in the face or surface due to the fact that the concrete did not completely fill the form. So, and this can be a structural issue, but normally with what we're talking about today, it is cosmetic, because as soon as you get to class 1 and class 2, it's very, very unforgiving about compaction-related blowholes. And or mix and or water cement ratio, a couple of other things. Now, there might be engineers there who know a lot more than I do. I just know that, I want to get the right quality concrete at the right water cement ratio installed appropriately and vibrated extremely carefully, which we'll talk further about later on when we get to install and detailing.
Just a quick one. Many of you know, but if you're not aware, that all of the red code, whenever you see a superscript like that, you can click on that and that'll give you the reference, the original source document. So this one, 3610, you can click on that or tap on it and it'll copy to your clipboard and you can search your volumes for that information. But that's...
Now, this is class 2, everybody. So if you've got class 2 specified or class 1 specified, I would be circulating the relevant tool to the concreter, who will, one, he or she will be really good to be doing class 1 work. So don't doubt them. But what you want to do is probably just say, you're across this too. Okay. And that if it comes to a dispute, and we don't want, so the whole point of what tools is, we don't want disputes. We want craftsmanship to be achieved because everybody's on the same page. And they know that eventually, if this is going to be measured by some nutter consultant, then everybody's across it now, and they're going to make sure that their vertical forms are straight.
Mm. Yep. And just a reminder, before you share, set the ohmmeter. So if you are dealing, as Jerry mentioned, if you are dealing with class 1, set that, then generate your share link, and that'll come through.
And zoom in on the area. So most of class 1 that goes wrong, as far as I'm concerned, is vertical, and it normally has an ornament or feature in it. And I'm just saying, you'll just zoom into exactly what you want on that class 1 page, and then you'll send that off to your contractor and or the formwork or concreter.
Yeah, you can clip it or you can download alt generate. Doesn't happen immediately, but that takes a little bit of time. So key terms we've gone through, and then let's talk about some of the principles or the science behind formwork.
So what have I said here? I have said, well, we've got the 5 classes of formwork. To me, I'm probably a little bit desensitized about the science of formwork other than support, and we can get into, the support of it. But obviously it needs its own structure around it when it is going to be filled with concrete. Now, you probably realize I draw pictures and I've created these tools, so I'm not fantastic at explaining just how important the support to your formwork is. So I'll probably say that is the simplest way for you. And we've got some details about formwork and all of the terms with it, but please do not underestimate the bigger. So the science of formwork is this: the bigger it is, the taller it is, and some of you will be doing some major designs. We did the links with Taylor, and they had some columns that were 11 meters high and 900 millimeters diameter. So when you're doing big, just be aware that, you've got to be very careful about straightness, support, and you've got massive loads coming on to your formwork.
Yep. And there's some information. This is just the PDF that I generated. Just if it's printed and you're sharing it with a contractor or a client or a colleague, they can scan that as well. So if anyone's quick on the draw, I'll leave that for a second longer. You can scan that. So the science of any other points around the science?
No, I'm not. I'm going to get into the granular stuff of the pitfalls and the install.
Yeah, so where are we getting it wrong?
Look, I have to say that the common problems especially with class 1, are with the face of it. So that we're seeing colour issues, we're seeing the fact that it was poured from 2 different trucks. We're seeing careless jointing of the stages, so that they may have left it for 20 minutes and they put on a layer of a new truck on top. And so even though it is colour matched, you do see a slight joint. I'm often seeing that the parties haven't agreed how they're going to patch the plugs if it's a face finish.
How are you just on the trucks? I mean, that's a product of, that's just how it is, right? So you're going to run out of concrete. You need to bring the next.
No, sequence. It's all got to do with planning and sequence. So I'll say to you, most concrete is common old garden. You're pouring a large concrete deck. You've got 18, 20 trucks. It doesn't matter. It's going to be painted. The soffit's going to be painted. Edges need to be carefully vibrated. And at another time, we may talk about the install best practice about concrete in general. But where it's not painted, and especially the reason why I've chosen Formwork Finishes, because we get a chance to talk about concrete quality and cover and all of those things, but we also talk about the other things. And we also get to know about spaces in vertical concrete. So they use spaces to keep the formwork exactly the same distance apart. So, and that's a really good device now that modern science allows us to use. But each of those spaces need to be capped. And quite often the architect, designer, and even the contractor don't realise that if they don't line those up precisely and have them nice and neat, and if they haven't agreed how they're going to be patched on the off form, they've got off form boarded finish. You can sometimes have other forms of finish applied, ribs and different profiles applied to the formwork to get a very unique finish. And then you've got these plugs that need to be put in. Agree with your customer before you pour just how those holes are going to be filled. They've got purpose-made plugs, but obviously the purpose-made plugs will not be made of the same concrete composition of the concrete that you've poured. And later on, I'll talk to you about making sure you know what the mix is and making sure that you can always patch it.
Excellent. I'll just share this. Curing methods. It's a very interesting read.
So curing is really important for vertical concrete compaction so as far as pitfalls, I cannot say. I think vibration of concrete, so this goes across not just formwork here. Vibration of concrete is really important. You're talking about somebody who used to vibrate his footings because I thought that they were the foundation of buildings. And I had a good quality vibrator. It was a steel vibrator. And I just used to pull it out each time that we were doing a footing. It didn't matter, 5-meter footing or a 35-meter footing. I would always vibrate because I thought it was a really good way to get the start of your building correct. Well, where the concrete's visible, you need to vibrate.
Now, and what's the risk if you don't vibrate?
There are a couple of things. One, you get inconsistent filling of the formwork. So you then get your blowholes, you get your segregation, and you get these. Sometimes we've seen jobs where they've had to jackhammer it out and then reform and report to it. But it's mainly getting it's you can't over vibrate either. The good craftsmen have told me. So we'll take a typical deck, so it's easy for us to understand. They put the vibrator in at about 300 millimeter centers, and they'll keep it in there until the bubbles stop. So you can imagine doing columns. You need to have somebody who really knows what they're doing. And if it's a deep column, my personal view is if it's a 900 millimeter column and it's going to be a face finish, you're stripping the form off it, and it's going to be visible to all the patrons at a shopping centre and or sporting ground or some sort of high value entry. Please make sure you've got very skilled people vibrating from the bottom up, and you need to know your floor finish too, because commonly I see columns where they've left some rubbish in at the bottom and they've got a polished concrete floor running up to a column that they spent a fortune on, and there's rubbish and there's crap that you can see on the very bottom of the column. See how easy it is for simple things to cause a lot of shame for people trying to do their job well.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of golden rules. Prototype.
Yeah, so I got the golden rules. Please dimension, really dimension. So I've said prototype there, but if you're doing something complex, this is where the design and the teamwork between you as the contractor and the designer, if it's fitting between two fixed points, that's okay. But if it's unique, you need to dimension it. And anything you want molded, sculpted, shaped, holed, open, sloped, it needs to be really precise because of the Unforgiven movie I'm seeing in my brain as I say that concrete is unforgiving. So, and if you're using any lining or any facing to get a finish to it, you need to agree the way they're lapped. You need to make sure that when you've done the prototype, which ideally shows the way the plastic liner the plastic liner may have a weatherboard finish, it may have different timber finishes, different texture finishes. You've got to agree how it's going to be jointed. You've got to agree how the holes are going to be finished. You've got to agree your movement joints, which we'll talk about later.
Who's typically in those conversations? The prototype is built. Who you
The designer and the contractor. So the designer is so all of you are knowing that I think that it's a hybrid of skill to create beautiful buildings. You've got the beauty is being done by the designer, the engineers providing the science, and the contractors. And I think I'm probably right that a large percentage of our audience often are contractors. So just people agreeing together and building a prototype that the client should pay for to make sure that everything's right, especially colour. So, and colour can be, especially because you can't change it, you've got to, and if it's an unpainted finish, you please make sure that you've agreed the colour and or the textures and anything that your client has asked you for.
Just a quick tip. I just shared a tool there. So if there's something in a side panel, for example, a calculator or an image, so that calculator, if that's the particular thing you want to share, then pop the side panel out and generate the share link from down here, right? From there versus up in the top right. And the recipient of that share link, if it's a contractor or an engineer, they'll see the same view as you. So it just expedites conversations.
So I'm just going to, so we've got the prototype, and the prototype should have the color in it. And this does, but it does tell you, you're trying to design something that you can get a single truck giving you enough. If it's a massive wall like the Cove down in Sydney that I've seen down in the rocks, it has some beautiful Harry side vertical walls of class 1 concrete. And that's a good example of fairly consistent colour right the way through. Now, if you are choosing a colour, so this is golden rules, make sure it's not subject to stain. Make sure that the detailing around and over it and the drainage around you builders and contractors out there, you're trying to avoid drainage going over a class 1 finished light coloured concrete. So these you might all think this is just common sense. Well, it's not. And that's why some of our buildings look horrible after 5 years, and yet a lot of the historic buildings look wonderful after 100.
Yep, absolutely. And then prototyping, get agreement, get your color, get the sequencing right, materials, and then
get it in writing. Don't trust anybody with their off-the-cuff suggestions and substitutions, and we'll just do this. The golden rules too, that there are rules about climate, and these are general rules about concrete in install. Use a consistent supplier that you've used forever. Make sure you stick to the MPA. Make sure you don't pour outside the temperature parameters that your engineer has told you. And if it's face work, please do that. And I've told you one batch. For anything that's going to be seen as you go in your beautiful double doors, you want to make sure that that's been done from one single truck.
Yep, absolutely. Agree on everything before you pour. After it's poured, it's very difficult to resolve those things. All right, so that's golden rules. Any other golden rules?
No, I think that's enough. We don't want to bore you all because we're getting close to time.
Yep, good choices. Selections and materials.
Yeah, so if you're specifying, you're listening to the client. The client wants a certain impact. They want it strong. If they're having face concrete, it's all got to do with their statement. Face concrete is often used around entries. It's very durable too, so that's also a good thing. So what are we looking at here? We're looking.
Yeah, where do you want to go? You wanted to go to
No. Keep talking.
Let's not forget movement. I was just reminding you wanted to talk about the science of movement at some point.
Yeah, so I am seeing a lot of exposed concrete that has got an uncontrolled movement. So if this is the only thing you get out of today besides colour and prototype and some of the general rules, concrete is shrinking 5 millimetres in 10 metres. It's a truism. Like we all expect brickwork to grow. Concrete shrinks 5 millimetres, and we need to manage that. And I'm seeing that even the engineers are not putting control joints or crack control joints in parapets, in upstands, in planter walls. And it's something that we, both as contractors and designers, we need to go back to them and say, please, we want to know where the joints need to go, and we need to say to the client, we need to be paid for these because we've got to put a fillet in. We've got to put a fillet in to control the predictable movement in long lengths of concrete upstands. Now, I have to say, on the Cove, I did not see a lot of movement. So I would say there that possibly the concrete quality was superlative, which on some of these buildings, it is really intensely QA'd. So I will say to you, if you've got a wall that's beyond 6 meters wide and 6 meters high, it isn't creating cracks vertically. You're not getting cracks horizontally in a 12-meter high wall, but you're certainly getting a lot of cracks in walls that are wider than 5 meters. And you're especially getting a lot of cracks in parapet walls that haven't been correctly protected until they've cured. Okay, so face concrete parapet walls, think about jointing, think about curing, and take very seriously about the concrete quality. And look, you'll hear with me, never let water be added to vertical concrete, please.
Yep. Selection, materials, any other comments?
I've got a couple of points here about selection of finishes, and I'm just following through on what I've got here.
Do check out the selection tool. Where is that? That's under skills, design. These are just principles.
The principles of selection. Obviously, you want to make sure that you've agreed your colour and you've agreed any. Oh, I have to say, please avoid any what's the word, finishes. I'm seeing, and I am an architect, as you all know, but I'm seeing architects specify fancy finishes that don't stick. No. Now, a lot of the older buildings that had a textured finish, they used to wash them, they'd blast them, they'd have ropes and they'd pull them out. All of those buildings look tacky, aged, and they stain horribly. So I have to say, exposed aggregate finishes on formwork age very badly unless it's grey. And even then, they tend to look like prisons and rather dire Gotham City buildings. So if you are going to use an off-form face finish, I'm probably going to say use the design skills. Light colours are great as long as they won't get stained. They need to be washable. So you need to make sure and you need to anticipate that they're going to be washed. And I would argue that some of the finishes that can be applied to off-form concrete should be considered. And it's above my pay grade to be able to tell you what those finishes are. But the good concrete suppliers will have really high value finishes that can go on that you won't see any gloss level on top of your off-form finish.
We've got a few more minutes to go. Integration, so with other details codes, and then we'll finish off with detailing and installation. So integration.
Well, I'm pushing this movement story, so please be aware, and this is a common theme throughout every single tool in our toolbox, is that we get these rules. The NCC says, look at this in a microscope, with a microscope, instead of realizing that relates to something else. So please be aware of movement. The bigger your concrete is, the more movement. The closer it is to the roof, the more movement. If you're putting concrete alongside anything else, you will have separation that you need to deal with. So let's be really attentive to that. So integration with movement, integration with your services. If you are pouring something with services coming into it, please be aware of it, plan it, get your conduits planned. You do realize too that if you are putting a large tube, a large item inside mass concrete, there is a chance that you're going to get some cracking around a large item. So if you're putting a 150 downpipe in a 250 wall, you may get some cracking around that item. So please discuss it with the engineer and work out where to hide that if it has to come through your concrete.
Yeah. And then lastly, detailing, insulation, I guess you've just touched on, but any other?
But don't miss anything, you know. It's really frustrating for me because I see things and people are tearing their hair out for something that should have been on the drawings. So this is one of the few times I'm an architect. I like solving things on site with anything very complex. You know, we've got the parameters from the architect, the drop-offs, the size, the general thing. With detailing, especially at entries and anything really fussy, a large panel with a trade name on it or a street number or some form of iconic, it needs to be documented very carefully, including the fillets, the arises, the details, the curves, anything that's non-standard needs to be on the documents so that you can translate it into what you build. I've mentioned tie rod spacing. Please set things out you've got to be relentless. You've got to make sure that your tie rods are close enough so that your form board never bends between the tie rods. The sculpture and the shape of anything, I favour client supplying. So if they've got something that's going to be a relief or a cast in, I really favour the client takes responsibility for that, because otherwise, if you have to make it up and they don't like it, there is that risk. You've heard me talk about the basic. This is again with detailing. Please make sure that you install your concrete very carefully. To me, it's just a simple mantra. Choose the right product, follow the engineering instruction, pour within the temperature range, vibrate it very carefully. Have your best concrete people on vibration with anything that's big and anything where you're going to strip the form and look at it, because once it's poured and it's got blowholes in it, there's not a lot that you can do. And then at the end of it, you do want to make sure that all the certification is in place. Devil is in the detail, and I always like to know the ingredients and mix in case you do make a mistake and you do need to on-site patch, which is almost impossible. So try to avoid going there.
I'm going to drop in here I mentioned at the beginning, but there's another link in there. We're going to start collecting names. If you feel free to register on that form for your attendance, and we are going to be issuing as part of CPD, Jerry, which we're rolling out soon.
I'm very pleased about that, because what I'm realizing now is that, in fact, this room here, any of you could have probably presented this story, especially with the tools in the background that frame and discipline the contractors and the designers with what they have to build. But most of the stuff that I'm talking about here is something that could easily have taken 6 or 8 weeks in tutorials, boring tutorials, and we didn't have anything to take away. So that was my frustration with all the courses I've done, is that I didn't have something that showed class 2. So that instead of avoiding, you know, I had to reinvent the wheel the whole time. I didn't know what class 2 was technically. I had to go to the standard and try to interpret it. And now we've got this, and we're essentially doing 6 to 8 week courses in half an hour. And ideally, we're going to get from all of you. I can see Bowden, I can see Dave, I can see Richard, James, Rob, Mark, Ron, Tracy, P. Thomas, and Clint. All of you now know pretty much what everybody knows in the industry, and you've got access to the reference with especially the Formworkometer. You'll be able to look at all the 5 classes anytime you need to.
Very good. Okay, thank you all very much. Jerry, do you remember what we're doing next week for our next teaching?
Look, I didn't. I'm sorry. I should do that.
We'll have to cut. There'll be another Teach Me module. We'll announce it and hope to see you there. Thank you all for your time. Have a nice week.
Thank you.